A recent Associated Press GFK poll revealed that almost 6 Americans out of 10 oppose the Afghanistan war, for which they see no end in sight. This poll has given even further impetus to the 9/11 Truth movement, which is comprised of thousands of people in the United States and around the world who reject the official account of the 9/11 attacks, which served as justification for the Afghanistan war in the first place. The Truth movement draws its conclusions on the factual findings of an impressive list of highly qualified researchers who have compiled a solid body of evidence contradicting every major aspect of the official account, and casting doubt on the true source and motives behind the 9/11 attacks. It is therefore as patriots and as concerned citizens that the 9/11 Truth movement asks for a truly independent, transparent investigation to finally answer the many still unresolved questions surrounding the tragic crimes of September 11, 2001. As admitted by the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission himself,
I don't believe for a minute that we got everything right. People will be investigating 9/11 for the next 100 years in this country. And they're going to find out some things that we missed.
For this purpose, various associations of professionals have been formed in the 9 years since 9/11. Among them are Pilots for 9/11 Truth, listing hundreds of former air controllers, civil and military pilots, and aviation experts from all over the world. Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, journalists and other media professionals for 9/11 Truth, intelligence officers for 9/11 Truth, including former top CIA analysts and former British Secret Service agents, lawyers for 9/11 Truth, medical professionals for 9/11 Truth, political leaders for 9/11 Truth, including members of the Japanese Parliament, former state and defense secretaries from different countries, and the honorary president of the Italian Supreme Court, religious leaders for 9/11 Truth, veterans for 9/11 Truth, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, counting over 1,200 architectural and engineering professionals. 3 new groups have just been formed and have been announced on September 9th in joint press conferences in New York and Los Angeles. They are Actors and Artists for 9/11 Truth, which includes theater and film actors, playwriters, novelists, screenwriters, film and stage directors, singers, composers, and music performers from all over the world. Scientists for 9/11 Truth, with more than 60 signatories between astrophysicists, biologists, biochemists, medical scientists, chemists, computer scientists, ecologists, geologists, geophysicists, mathematicians, physicists, and science professors from all over the world. And U.S. military officers for 9/11 Truth, with Air Force pilots, Army, Navy, and defense experts questioning the military aspects of the official version of 9/11. All these people have looked at the evidence available and have become convinced that a new investigation is absolutely necessary to make sure that events like 9/11 never happen again in our country.
Thank you very much. And like Richard said, my name is Eric Lawyer, and I founded the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth after I watched Richard in one of his presentations, and I realized that something more had to be done. And I just want to thank Richard for everything he's doing here. And the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth strongly support Richard Gage and all the architects and engineers that have the courage to sign that petition. And I know from personal experience there's about 5 times as many out there that believe what we believe but don't have the courage to sign it. So what I'm hoping today is that people will find the courage after listening to this presentation and seeing everybody here and seeing that we are behind it. We also demand an investigation that follows the national standards and has contempt and subpoena powers. 9/11 was the greatest loss of life and property damage in U.S. fire history. This should have been the most protected, preserved, over-tested, and thorough investigation of a crime scene in world history. Sadly, it was not. What was it? Well, we know from their own admission the majority of the evidence was destroyed. Like Richard said, 22 years of experience. I've seen a lot of crime scenes. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I was out at the site. I saw trucks leaving faster than anywhere I've ever seen, but I accepted it at the time, and for years I accepted it because it was a recovery and rescue operation, and that's normal to have something like that going. Again, we've never seen anything like it, but that was expected. What I didn't know for years, what was going on behind the scenes, was that evidence was being destroyed when it was shipped off. By their own admission, Tower 7 investigation, this investigation at Tower 7 had no physical evidence. How do you investigate a crime when you've destroyed all the evidence? It doesn't make sense. They also admit that they refuse to test explosives or to test for explosives or residue of thermite. Now, this is what I'm going to go into here just real quickly, is there are national standards for an investigation. That's what all of us are asking for, an investigation that follows national standards and holds people accountable. This manual right here, just so you can see it, is what we call the kind of the Fire Investigation 101. This is the most basic fire investigation manual there. This is for the 2001 edition. This is what should have been referred to, at least. It doesn't have to be followed exactly, but it should have been used as a guideline for the investigation. I'm just going to cover a few of the things that are in here. So NIST violated, and the initial investigators that did not protect the scene violated the most basic of the guidelines. And I'm going to cover 5 of them here. One is the NFPA 9.3.6. It covers spoliation of evidence. Specifically what it reads is, once evidence has been removed from the scene, it should be maintained and not destroyed or altered until the investigation is complete. The steel was melted down prior to the investigation. We know that from their own admission. This is no conspiracy theory stuff. 19.2.4, exotic accelerants. If on the scene you find melted steel or concrete, you should consider the use of exotic accelerants. And they specifically say in the manual, thermite mixtures produce exceedingly hot fires that can account for melted steel and concrete. It also says they leave residues that can be tested for visually and chemically identifiable. Again, they did not test for it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved in melting those steel beams.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
I'm curious about the pool of molten steel that was found in the bottom of the towers.
I am too.
And
please tell me about it. Have you seen it?
Well, not personally, but eyewitnesses there found huge pools of molten steel beneath the towers, and some scientists don't think that the collapse of the building could have melted all that steel. And physics professor analyzed some of the steel, and Stephen Jones, and he found evidence of thermate residue, which would explain how the buildings collapsed by means of pre-planted explosives. So, have you analyzed the steel for any of those residues?
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava from
a volcano.
The fires got very intense down there and it actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the end here.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
You saw steel, some of the thickest steel I've ever seen, bent like a pretzel. And you just couldn't imagine the force that took. Where the grapplers were pulling stuff out. big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames, which was pretty spooky to see.
There was even a point where you would create an air pocket by moving steel, fueling the fires on the ground, would ignite cars and cars would just blow up. But, you know, these underground fires were just like the fires of hell.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it was just a bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that, Chief? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing. Great.
You see how this debris is still smoking? That's from the fires that are still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning. Every now and then, one of the pieces of equipment will dig in, they'll open up a small area, the oxygen will rush in, and you'll get this plume of brown, black smoke coming up. That's because that fire just got more oxygen. So, I mean, these things are burning. At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
And all of a sudden, he comes out of this little tunnel screaming, "Wait till you see what I found." And he pulls in ministers and officials, and there, this cross is fully extended, melted together with the intense heat. The two beams were never initially part of the same structure. Heat literally melted them together. And the piece of metal that's draped over was molten metal that had literally fallen over one of the arms.
Steel-toed boots is one of the biggest things.
Steel-toed boots?
Steel-toed boots. Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1,100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
It was literally steaming. Your boots would melt in certain areas. That's how hot it was. The steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks at least.
Go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
There's video of it.
Melted around 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it's probably pretty difficult to get that kind of temperatures in a fire. So I don't know the basis. I can't address your question if I don't know the basis.
Well, NASA pictures, thermal images showed those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
Would you send them to me?
Okay.
My name is Mark, and I'm the individual who was questioning Dr. Gross, and he asked me to email to him those thermal images. When I approached him after his talk to get his email address for that purpose, he refused to provide it to me. I think this is important because it reveals the attitude of the NIST investigators, which is one of willful ignorance of what really happened on 9/11.
Again, they did not test for it. And just put it in perspective, on a routine house fire, if we suspect even the slightest use of an accelerant, we're going to test for it when there's no fatalities, when there's very little property damage. So to not do it on this, there is absolutely no excuse. I can't drive that point home enough. 18.15 is analyze fuel source. All available fuel sources should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all the physical damage criteria. For example, if you find pulverized concrete, which we all know there was in all three buildings, there was pulverized concrete, the only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they shouldn't be considering fires. They shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't account for pulverized concrete. They should only be considering exotic accelerants and explosives. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons along with explosives used in furthering his or her goal. We know they used them in '93. Why would we not test for them now? There was reports that day, multiple reports, which I'll get into here in a second. So they could have put them in the basement. How do we know that unless we test for it? I mean, even if it is the terrorists that they claim they are, we need to test this. 14.3, preservation of the fire scene and physical evidence. We find the following. The cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. The entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. It's just over and over. There's so many. You can go to our website, the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We have many more of these actual chapters that cover what they should have done that they did not do. So now, by their own admission, in all 3 building collapses, NIST refused to physically test, like Dr. Stephen Jones did, for explosives. This is just unbelievable. And here are their excuses, and I quote, "It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected, either prior to September 11th or during that day." So again, I've been on a lot of fire scenes, and I've seen a lot of investigations, and why would we not test because something's hard to do? That's the exact reason you need to investigate it. If that was hard to do, we need to find out how they did it. And number 2, NIST excuse. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of the video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. That's one of the excuses why they didn't test.
He's hit the building, but before, and one of the experiences that I said even when I was pulled from the rubble on 9/11 is that there was an initial explosion on the sub-level number 2, B2. There were 6 sub-levels in the building prior to the plane hitting the building, and I believe that that was an explosion set up by explosive to actually weaken the foundation.
At 8:30, he says he was headed to level B4 in Tower 1, 4 stories below ground.
I go downstairs, the foreman tells me to go to remove the containers. As I'm walking by the main freight car of the building, in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion, of whatever happened, it threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
We then were talking about the day's work and what needed to be done when we heard a massive explosion that was in the World Trade Center at about 8:46 a.m. in the morning. The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then we heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong and there was a major problem.
They were having coffee in the World Trade Center.
All of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded.
We heard the noise associated with an implosion. Secondary explosion on Tower 2. Some sort of explosive device.
We're obviously having a bit of trouble right now maintaining our location because we just heard one more explosion.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse? To me, it sounded like an explosion.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay. All right. Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Right now. You gotta get back from here. I know that. You gotta get back. All right.
And every few minutes you'll hear like a small sort of a rumbling sound, almost like an explosion sound, and another chunk of it will come flying down into the street.
I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive devices planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Sorry, you said the bomb? What'd you say? Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Got it.
There was another big explosion in the other town. Flames coming out and just billowing
Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused it.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of. Antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
We started floor by floor, started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
To take down a building.
Like, it sounded like gunfire. You know, bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
We presume because of the initial explosion there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandeliers shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Firefighter John Schroeder arrived in the lobby of the North Tower shortly after the first plane struck.
So we're standing there in the lobby, we're getting all together. All of a sudden, we hear... I look down to my right, and the elevators exploded, something out of like a Bruce Willis Die Hard movie. People just come running out of the elevators, on fire, fireball. We got down to the lobby, and everything was blown out, exploded. Everything was. We were the only ones in the lobby now. We were in the lobby. All it looks like everything was exploded. Everything was gone. We're like, what is going on here? We didn't know. We were like, this is crazy. But for every window in the lobby to be exploded, I mean, them windows were like as thick as forget it. They were 2-3 inch glasses, you know, come on. They exploded out of the lobby, you know, it wasn't from the jet fuel. No way. The elevators exploded, they were down from the lobby. The lobby was over here. That should never have happened. Something would happen there, and that wasn't. We came down, it looked like a bomb went off in the lobby. There was no fire, it just looked like a bomb went off.
Apparently they didn't read Chapter 18. 18 is the general definition of explosions. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not, in big bold letters, an essential element in the definition of an explosion. The generation and violent escape of gases are the primary criteria of an explosion. So that alone says they should have tested for it. But then we also, NIST has lied, and we can prove it. As soon as the new investigation happens, the evidence is out there for you to see right now. We have 118 first responders who reported explosions. We have the radio transmissions from FDNY members that are still recorded today that reported explosions. We have audio recordings. We have video recordings. I've personally talked to witnesses that heard them. So there's nothing short of saying they lied, and they need to be held accountable. And besides that, like I said, there is no excuse for not testing for explosives. And so at the very least, at the very best, even if you want to believe the official story, this was the most incompetent investigation of all time. And I've talked to a lot of investigators that were there, and I asked them the specific question, why did they refuse to test? They weren't the ones who refused, but NIST did. And they said, all we can say, all they can answer is incompetence, or they tell me to shut up. They cannot give me any reason that follows national standards. So, but the reality, after all the research everybody here and the incredible people we're in the room with today have done, the reality is it was a criminal investigation to cover up the crime. So, just to finish, I'd like to read a quote. This is from a retired, decorated FDNY lieutenant. Anyone who knows the fire service, he is a stud. He worked on Ladder Company 26, Rescue Company 3, Rescue Company 1 in his career. Anyone who knows, those are amazing companies. Here's his comment. Trade Tower 7 by itself is the smoking gun, not hit by an aircraft with only a few relatively small fires. It came down in a classic crimp and implosion, going straight into its basement, something only very precise demolitions can accomplish, which takes days, if not weeks, to prepare. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention it, and FEMA actually stated they didn't know why it collapsed and left it at that. Brothers, I know that the above implications are hard, almost unthinkable, but the official explanation is utter nonsense, and 343 of our murdered brothers are crying out for justice. Yeah. Thank you.